Our first homework problem involved discrimination. And what we're trying to prove here is that over 70% of all individuals who identify as black have experienced discrimination. To do this, we've got some data and a sample size. Because I want to prove something, it's a hypothesis test. Because I'm dealing with proportions, it's a proportion hypothesis test. I've only got one sample, so this is good. I'm going to go ahead and start with step 1, which is to list. When I list, I need to list p hat, I need to list n, and I need to list p naught, my assumed value. P hat in this case is how many actually experienced it, which is found that 71% had experienced discrimination. So p hat is going to be this 0.71. P hat's my actual value. When I go to find n, it's my sample size. We have 700 people, so n is 700. And then finally, I need to find what p naught is. P naught's my comparison value. That is, okay, 71% of my sample found this. What am I trying to prove? Well, I'm trying to prove that over 70%. So 70% will be my p naught. After I found that, the next step is going to be to go ahead and write out my hypothesis. To write my hypothesis, I need h naught and ha. H naught's my null hypothesis. That is what I'm trying to assume. So I'll have P equals, that is, I'm assuming that the proportion of all individuals who identify as black who have experienced discrimination is, and I put P naught in here, so 70%. That is, I always put whatever my assumed value is right here, because it's what I'm assuming. Now this isn't what I'm trying to prove, so when I write my alternative hypothesis, I'll have P and 0.70. I want to show, we want to conclude that over 70%. So this will be P is greater than 70%. After I've done this, the next step is step 3. Step 3 is my test statistic. When I write out my test statistic, I need to first of all find SE. SE is the estimate for my standard deviation. It is the square root, and this is where we have to pay attention, of P naught, 1 minus P naught, all over n. We use P naught here because we are assuming that it is more accurate than our sample. So in a confidence interval, we just have P hat, so we use that. In a hypothesis test, we use P naught because we're assuming it's more accurate. So when I plug this in here, I'll have 0.70, 1 minus 0.70, all over 700. I'll round this to 4 decimal places because I'm dealing with proportions here, so I'll get 0.0173. After I calculate SE, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and calculate what Z is. Z is my actual test statistic. I calculate Z by taking my actual minus my expected and dividing off by my standard deviation estimate. Which means my actual is P hat, my expected is P naught, and my standard deviation estimate is SE. 0.71 minus 0.70 all over, and SE was 0.0173, which gives me a z-score of 0.58. This is a really tiny z-score, so let's go ahead and look at what happens when we find my p-value. Now, because our z-score is positive 0.58, and when I look at my alternative hypothesis, it's greater than, I've got 2 options on how to find this p-value. So, step 4, my p-value, I need to pay attention to, once again, I have a z-score of 0.58, but I want to find this upper end tail. The z-table doesn't give me upper end tails, so I have 2 options. Option 1 is to go ahead and look at 0.58 on the table, and then to go ahead and whatever I find based on 0.58, take 1 minus that value. Option 2 is to go ahead and look at negative 0.58 instead. The reason I can look at negative 0.58 instead is this end tail I have up here is exactly the same as the end tail I'd have if I look at negative 0.58 and below. So there are 2 options here. I'm going to go ahead and show how to do this one. Once again, I'm looking at negative 0.58 because I have a greater than probability, which means I want to find an extreme end tail, so looking at above 0.58 is the same as looking at below negative 0.58. Inserting my table in here then, I'm going to go ahead and try and find 0.58 on the table. When I look for 0.58, and I'm looking on the negative once again, I'm going to come over here, negative 0.5, look across, and 8, look down, and where these join, will be the value I need. So I have a p-value right here of 0.2810. Once I find my p-value, the next step, fifth step, is my conclusion. Remember, I always compare my p-value to what's called my significance level. In this case, it's 0.05. When I look at my p-value, which is 0.2810, it is greater than 0.05. Because my p-value is greater than 0.05, this means I am going to fail to reject. That is, there's a 28% chance that all of this would happen if in reality it was exactly 70%, if my assumption is correct. Well, 28% chance isn't ridiculously small. I mean, it could happen. Like a 25% chance of something happening, it happens occasionally. So there's not enough evidence. And when I say there's not enough evidence, I say there is not enough evidence to conclude that over 70% of individuals who identify as black have experienced discrimination. Now, to be very clear here, this is not saying that I am certain this is true. I'm saying that just this study didn't give us enough evidence. We might want to poll more people. We might need to poll a slightly different group of people to get more evidence. But for this specific example, there is not enough evidence to suggest that over 70% of individuals who identify as black have experienced discrimination.